What if I told you that the greatest extinction event in human history isn't being caused by bombs or melting ice caps, but by a quiet surrender? A surrender not of territory, but of thought. An erosion not of land, but of soul. There is no battle cry, no blood spilled on the streets, and yet we are vanishing, fragment by fragment. We are losing something ancient, something sacred, not by force, but through a smile, through a like, through a scroll, through that invisible thread tethering our minds to glowing rectangles. We are unmaking ourselves. Imagine a world where every instant of discomfort is immediately anesthetized. A flick of a finger, and all unease dissolves into curated pleasures. But in numbing the discomfort, we've also muted the depth. The very ache that once birthed poetry, philosophy, and revolutions has been silenced. Our struggle wasn't just pain, it was also meaning. Without it, what remains? Once we looked up at the stars and wondered. Now we look down, endlessly refreshed, sedated by novelty. Where once the mind wandered, it now loops. Where once we craved understanding, we now crave dopamine, a neurochemical lullaby that rocks us into docility, singing of likes and shares and endless distraction. This is not a glitch in the system. It is the system. We were warned, of course, but not in the shrill voice of alarmists, in the soft, prophetic whisper of minds who saw too far ahead. A writer imagined a world where love of comfort became our chains and pleasure our prison. Not brutality, but indulgence. Not censorship, but overload. The people would not resist. They would celebrate. They would call their servitude freedom. They would cheer as their minds were emptied, because the emptiness came wrapped in fireworks. We thought oppression would come with boots. We never imagined it would come with apps. Inside our brains, changes are unfolding. Not poetic ones, but physiological ones. Systems that once fueled focus, drive, depth, wither. Each swipe, each alert, each tap, it's not just behavior. It's transformation. The architecture of our cognition is being remodeled, not by intention, but by addiction. Our reward centers adapt, recalibrate, then wither under the constant barrage. The mind, once a cathedral of ideas, is becoming a fast food counter. Quick hits, no substance, no sustenance, and yet the tragedy lies not only in the loss, it lies in our cooperation. This isn't just happening to us, it is happening through us. We aren't being forced to choose shallowness. We are choosing it, joyfully. We are trading the infinite complexity of reality for the simplicity of algorithms, not because we were coerced, but because we grew tired of thinking. 1,000 times a day we make that trade. Reflection for reaction, connection for performance, truth for affirmation. And like addicts returning to their fix, we keep scrolling, even as we feel the hollowness grow. When was the last time you truly lingered in a thought? Not glanced at it, but sat with it, turned it over, let it gnaw at you? When did you last welcome boredom and see where it might lead? That uncomfortable space where inspiration is born, where insight blossoms, has been filled with noise. And in silencing that discomfort, we have also silenced our capacity for depth. This is not the collapse of civilization. It is something far more intimate, the collapse of the self. What is left of a being who cannot sustain attention, who fears complexity, who cannot tolerate contradiction? Not a thinker, not a seeker, just a consumer. The platforms do not merely observe us, they shape us. They chisel away the jagged edges of individuality until we all resemble each other. Predictable, reactive, divided. We no longer think to discover. We think to defend, to belong, to agree. You might still believe your thoughts are your own. But can you trace their origin? Were they born in silence or in the echo chamber of the feed? Did they emerge from solitude or from the collective noise of curated consensus? The algorithm does not just predict, it dictates. And in surrendering our minds to its rhythms, we lose not only our thoughts, but the ability to know what thinking once felt like. Every opinion, every outrage, every fleeting joy, it feels personal, but it is packaged, delivered, recycled. If everyone believes the same thing, feels the same outrage, laughs at the same joke, is that consciousness? Or is it mimicry? We are not being cloned in labs. We are being cloned in timelines. The algorithms do not need to force conformity. They simply reward it. They do not punish dissent. They make it invisible. And so, without knowing why, we drift into sameness. Not because we were told to, but because it feels easier than the alternative. To question, to challenge, to wonder. Those require energy, friction, time. And we are too tired, too distracted, too entertained. The irony is cruel. In seeking to connect with everyone, we have disconnected from ourselves. In being fed everything, we have forgotten how to hunger. We are not thinking. We are reacting. We are not living. We are performing. And the saddest part is that we feel empowered. The cage has no bars, so we do not see it. The leash is invisible, so we call it freedom. But the leash pulls nonetheless. What happens to a species that loses its ability to be still, to be bored, to be uncertain? What becomes of minds that cannot dwell in discomfort long enough to create something new? Evolution has always rewarded adaptability, but now we are adapting to a world that rewards emptiness. That is the new pressure, not to grow, but to scroll. And yet, the story need not end in despair. The same mind that was rewired can be rewired again. The same neuroplasticity that bent toward addiction can bend back toward awareness. The same species that built pyramids and symphonies and revolutions can remember how. But only if we choose to. And choice begins with awareness. Not just the awareness of harm, but of possibility. There are still places where silence lives. There are still books, still conversations, still questions that resist answers. There are still mornings untouched by screens, still moments that can be reclaimed. The battle is not against technology. It is against unawareness, against passivity, against the silent surrender of that most sacred capacity to think, to feel, to wonder. We do not need to destroy our devices. We need to dethrone them. We need to remember that attention is sacred, and that where we place it shapes not just our day, but our destiny. The platforms will not change themselves. They are designed for profit, not for preservation. But we can change. In small, stubborn ways. In the quiet refusal to be predictable. In the radical act of thinking a thought no algorithm suggested. In the bravery of uncertainty. In the commitment to depth. So ask yourself, not what you consume, but what it consumes in you. Not what you post, but what it costs. Not how many see you, but whether you see yourself. This isn't just about data or dopamine. It's about dignity. The extinction we face is not the end of our bodies, but of our inner worlds. And yet, within that warning lies a seed, the seed of choice, the seed of resistance, the seed of rediscovery. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something even greater than what we are losing. There comes a moment in every journey through the shadows when the question is no longer what we are running from, but what we are running toward. We have wandered so long in this digital wilderness, surrounded by flickering illusions and synthetic comfort, that we've forgotten the texture of real presence. But presence still waits. Not in the next notification, but in the quiet, beneath the noise, beneath the reflex to distract, beneath the desire to be seen. The soul was never designed for constant exposure. It thrives in shelter, in mystery, in the sanctuary of moments not shared, not optimized, not performed. And yet, we now live under the gaze of the invisible audience. We curate ourselves before we even know who we are. We shape our thoughts, not to discover truth, but to fit the syntax of virality. We strip away nuance because nuance doesn't trend. But human beings are made of nuance. We were not built to be transparent. We were built to wrestle with contradiction, to hold beauty and terror in the same breath, to love what we do not understand. These things are not efficient. They are not data points. They are sacred. And every scroll, every algorithmic loop, every digitally shortened attention span pulls us further from that sacred ground. But here's the paradox. Within the very technology that ensnares us lies the potential for transcendence, not in how it was designed, but in how we choose to use it. Tools are not tyrants unless we make them so. And in reclaiming our agency, we don't have to abandon the modern world. We have to awaken within it. Imagine for a moment a world where we remembered how to be still, not passively, not bored, but attentively still. The kind of stillness that listens before it speaks, that questions before it reacts, that waits before it judges. Imagine replacing the urge to post with the urge to ponder. What would we uncover in ourselves if we stopped narrating our lives for an audience and started living them for their own sake? It begins in the smallest choices. Not heroic, not dramatic. The choice to walk without headphones. The choice to sit with a feeling instead of fleeing to content. The choice to speak slowly, to listen deeply, to read something that demands our full mind. These are acts of defiance now. Quiet rebellions against a culture that values speed over depth, outrage over wisdom, attention over awareness, and yes, resistance will be inconvenient. The brain conditioned to seek ease will protest. It will itch for distraction. But behind that itch lies the doorway back to ourselves. To relearn the ancient skill of patience is to recover the very muscles of thought. To endure boredom is to prepare the soil of creativity. To choose solitude is to rediscover the contours of our own minds unmediated by metrics. The philosophers of old did not tweet. They walked, they sat in gardens, they stared at the stars, not to capture them on camera, but to be captured by awe. They understood something we've nearly lost, that the world does not exist to entertain us. It exists to change us. We must remember that knowledge is not accumulation, but transformation. That learning is not about collecting facts, but allowing new ideas to destabilize us, to break down what we thought we knew, and build something more honest in its place. This requires courage, intellectual courage, emotional courage, the kind of courage that digital culture quietly undermines by making us believe we must always be comfortable, always be affirmed, always be right. But growth does not happen in comfort. It happens in the raw, uncertain places where we are humbled, where we must admit ignorance, where we must encounter otherness not as a threat, but as a mirror. If we are to reclaim our minds, we must also reclaim dialogue, not argument, not debate, but real dialogue, the kind where silence is allowed, where contradiction is respected, where the goal is not victory, but understanding. This is the soil of wisdom, and wisdom is the only antidote to a world intoxicated by information. Let us go further. Let us ask what kind of culture we are cultivating, not what we are producing, but what we are becoming. A culture is not defined by its apps or trends, but by its collective soul, by what it honors, by what it protects, by what it is willing to sacrifice for the sake of something greater. What are we honoring now? Is it the capacity to feel deeply, to think rigorously, to wonder endlessly? Or are we honoring visibility, immediacy, and ease? What we value, we become. What we repeat, we embody. Culture is not a distant force. It is a mirror held up to our habits. And so we must ask, what habits are shaping us? What rituals define our days? If the first thing we touch in the morning is our phone and not our breath, what are we telling ourselves is sacred? If our silence is always filled, what space remains for revelation? We are not powerless, but power in this age looks different. It is not loud. It is not viral. It does not shout to be seen. True power is in restraint, in attention, in the willingness to be changed by what we do not yet understand. We must become strange again. Strange in our slowness. Strange in our refusal to rush to outrage. Strange in our curiosity. Strange in our love for ambiguity. Because to be truly human is, and always has been, a form of strangeness in a world that seeks efficiency. Let us remember that freedom is not the absence of limits, but the presence of depth. That liberty is not the ability to do anything, but the ability to choose what is worth doing. This is the work of the mind unshackled, the soul unscripted, the human unautomated. There is still time, not endless time, but enough. Enough to turn inward, not as escape, but as exploration. Enough to ask new questions, to tend to neglected parts of ourselves, to nurture the inner wilderness that no algorithm can chart. Enough to rekindle the sacred act of thinking for its own sake. We cannot reclaim the future unless we reclaim our capacity to imagine it, not as a reactive fantasy, but as a creative vision born of presence. We must teach our children not just how to use technology, but how to remain human within it. We must design not for engagement, but for enlightenment, not for attention, but for awakening. And we must do it now, because each day we wait, the grooves deepen, the defaults harden, the capacity to resist fades. But so too does the opportunity to lead. And the world needs leaders, not in status, but in spirit. People who embody the alternative, not just speak it. People who live with depth in an age of speed, who dare to be human where humanity is optional. If we lose this chance, we may still exist, but existence alone is not life. To be alive is to be fully present, to feel the ache of truth, to carry the weight of thought, to know oneself not through mirrors, but through meaning. The future will belong to those who remember how to carry that weight, not because it is easy, but because it is real. And so we begin, not with a revolution, but with a breath, with the smallest act of awareness, with the decision to sit, to notice, to choose, against the grain, against the algorithm, against the erosion. We do not need to change the world in a moment. We only need to change our direction. The rest will follow.